Hi, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. Live streaming from Chicago. I'm Ben Greiner, Director of Apple Technology at Ntiva. With me today, joining in a few minutes, will be Ross Matsuda, our Systems Administrator, focused on the Apple platform. And today we're going to be discussing Apple Business Manager. I'll also refer to it as ABM, so I don't have to keep saying Apple Business Manager. For those of you that already have an Apple Business Manager account, hopefully we'll get a little deeper into it so you can make sure you're taking full advantage of that platform. And for those of you that do not have an Apple Business Manager account, ABM account, we're going to discuss how important it is that you get one because it's the real struggle with Apple Business Manager. And let me share my screen so everyone can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to go full screen here. This is the business.apple.com page. And if you can go to business.apple.com and log in to an Apple Business account, then you have Apple Business Manager. The struggle we run into is that Apple is very much a security and privacy driven company. And because of that, we cannot, as a service provider, as a partner, we cannot do this for you. We can take you here, we can help you as much as possible, but it must actually be done by someone within your organization. And I will talk about that in just a minute, but I just reminded myself, I'm trying to do Apple News first before we get into it. So some quick notes on Apple News. Parallels 17. For those of you who don't know Parallels is a longtime VM software manufacturer, software developer, allows you to run Windows on a Mac. And with Parallels 17, they now have brought Windows 11 support in addition to M1 support. So when Apple came out with their new operating system, or not their new operating system, their new chip, their silicon chip, their custom Apple chip, they currently call the M1. You could not run Windows on that chip. VMware couldn't do it. Parallels couldn't do it. Parallels announced that their new version can do that. I have not tested it. I just read about it, but that's one of the latest news items. And then I wanted to mention, because it's been in the news a lot here, and this is a whole nother topic we could probably go into, but Apple mentioned that they're going to be putting out a way to more tightly integrate this CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material. It's Apple's published a new FAQ as of 2 days ago on its plan to scan user photos for child abuse imagery in an effort to combat the growing concerns. So basically, Apple said that they were going to do, let me see if I can get the link here. So here's a PDF. You can search for it, Expanded Protections for Children, Frequently Asked Questions. That's what they posted recently. And then here's a great article. And hey, Ross. I see Ross joining us now. The last several live streams, my guests have made me sweat to the very end before they show up, Ross. So thank you for showing up.
Absolutely. Terribly sorry about the
no worries.
delay.
So what I wanted to point out is this article here, because there's been a lot of news articles talking about the demise of Apple privacy and Apple security because of their statement about the CSAM. I don't know if it's pronounced CSAM, Ross. Do you know this?
Couldn't tell you, but until proven otherwise,
I'll just call it CSAM. I just want to mention, this is a great article that talks about how, a casual view of the Apple-related headlines, and that's all I've been seeing, Apple-related headlines, might lead one to think that the company's child safety mechanisms are somehow unique, and they are not. Google's been doing this, Microsoft has been doing this, Apple has been doing this to a certain extent, and now they're going to do it in a more in-depth way on the device. But I'm not going to go into that because, like I said, that's a whole nother topic. I just wanted to address it because it's clearly in the news. People are talking about it. And because Apple did just publish this FAQ, which I have not even had time to read. I just found it when I was preparing my notes for today. So those are the news related items. Let's get back to Apple Business Manager. And Ross, what I was about to say is we want all of our clients to have Apple Business Manager, but the struggle is we cannot do this for them. So I just want to briefly walk through, if you don't have Apple Business Manager, how you get an Apple Business Manager account so that everyone knows. And hopefully we can even use this recording to help some of our clients in the future. So if you cannot log in here, you need to go to the Enroll Now link. And the Enroll Now link will take you to a very simple form, but it can also be a roadblock because one of the first things it asks for is a DUNS number. And I know from experience of owning my own business, I don't recall ever asking for a DUNS number. I was just given a DUNS number when I registered my business. So any legal entity in the United States anyway will have a DUNS number. And that's a Dun & Bradstreet number, and it's like a credit check number, and it's used by the credit agencies to verify that you're in good standing. And who knows what else they use it for? I do not know. But Apple is using that as an identifier for businesses. So you have to find your DUNS number, and there's a way to look it up. And unfortunately, I don't have the link handy, and I don't want to go looking for it because that may take me down a rabbit hole. But Ross, I think we have it in our K-base. Maybe you could, in our private K-base, maybe you could find it. And you can typically look up your own DUNS number very easily, but it's not always good to ask me to look it up for you because occasionally, especially large organizations, they may have multiple DUNS numbers. It's rare and unusual, but I've seen it happen either through acquisitions or multiple offices, or they're just registered differently, possibly as an LTD and an LLC. So they have multiple, it's a complex business setup. At the end of the day, you need to have one single DUNS number. And if you struggle with that, obviously, reach out to us and we can help you. But you have to provide that. There's no way around it. So your name, your DUNS number, your phone number, your website, pretty straightforward. And then your details. You're the one filling out the form. Maybe you are also the verification contact, maybe you're not. If we have the DUNS number, I have filled this form out for clients. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes I feel like it makes it more confusing because then they say, well, you filled it out, Ben. You can verify for me. And I cannot. I absolutely cannot verify for you. So if you click on this little question mark, Apple explains the person who can bind your organization to Apple Business Manager. And they talk about examples of who that might be. So it is important that whoever you put down as your verification contact knows that Apple will contact them. And I believe it's a phone call. And guess what? We all get too many phone calls today, and we all get a lot of spam phone calls, so no one answers their phone. And so what happens is this form gets filled out. Apple reaches out to the verification contact. They don't hear anything. If we already have a relationship with the client and Apple knows that, or if I filled out the details form, Apple might contact me and say, we have not heard from your verification contact. And then I will reach out to them and say, please contact Apple because they're trying to get a hold of you. And I know that sounds like a scam, but that is real. Apple must talk to you before they will validate this free account. It's a free account. So the form looks very easy, but for whatever reason, or the reasons I've just explained, it can be very complex and can drag on. What should take a few days can drag on for weeks, either because we struggle to get the correct DUNS number, or we struggle to get the verification to have that conversation. And Ross, you've been involved in some of these. Is there anything you would add to that summary?
No, I think that's pretty much it. The nice thing is that as long as you can pull together someone for Apple to talk to, and you can use the Duns lookup. I believe it's just dnb.com. I'll toss that into chat. I believe this is what we're looking for. As long as you can get through these first couple steps, that really is going to open the gates for you.
Yeah, here it is.
That looks right.
So you can search for my company, if it's your company, or you can search for another company. I don't really understand what the difference is there, because I think the process is very similar. But if you look for another company, you have to have some basic information, which you can typically find out from a public website. But anyway, that's a good place to start. And the point is, we want to have everybody, everybody enrolled in this. And when I say everybody, the general rule, and there's no hard fast rule, but if you have at least 10 Apple devices, you definitely want to think about enrolling in Apple Business Manager. If you only have one, it's probably not necessary. Two, probably not necessary. As you start to get multiple devices, it becomes more and more necessary. And 10 is definitely the tipping point, I would say. But we'll go into that in a little more detail once we log into it. So the other challenge that people run into when filling out this form is Apple will then ask them to create or accept an invitation into Apple Business Manager. So let's say I filled this form out, I verified it with Apple, and now they send me an invite to actually log in for the first time. That very first login is going to require me to enter an Apple ID, and it cannot be an existing Apple ID. Does this ring a bell, Ross? The frustrations we've had with this?
Yeah, this step always is trickier than it sounds.
Yeah. So we recommend you create an account that's like abm@yourdomain.com or abmadmin@yourdomain.com, something like that, to be your dedicated Apple ID for Apple Business Manager. This is where Apple Business Manager, or rather Apple IDs, I feel can get very confusing, because some Apple IDs can be used for multiple services. Some IDs have to be dedicated to that service. I believe Apple Business Manager is one that has to have a dedicated account. I might be wrong, or they might have changed something, but in my experience, it's just safer to have a dedicated Apple Business Manager account for this login and this login only. So what happens is people try to use their existing Apple ID that is already associated with, buying music or iCloud or something, and it won't work. Or they try to use our Apple ID or our email address, and ours won't work because it has to be your domain, has to be your company. So that's the other stumbling block that I see. So the best thing to do is to create not a full-on email account. It could be an alias or a mailing list. It just has to deliver somewhere where you can respond to the verification process, because the verification process, not only does Apple talk to you, but then they email you for verification. And I think they even text you today for verification. And you have to go through that in order to get into this. The good news is once you're past that, that's the hard part. But why do you even want Apple Business Manager account? The reason that you want it is this is the verification process for zero touch. And zero touch is the method by which you can auto-enroll company-owned devices into a management system. And you get special privileges with that zero touch. There are three things that you must have to make that happen. You must buy from an authorized Apple reseller or Apple themselves. You must have that purchase connected to your Apple Business Manager account, which is what we're talking about here. And then Apple Business Manager must be connected to your mobile device management system, your MDM. And that's typically what we bring to the relationship when we're helping clients. We bring the MDM. So you don't need to worry about the MDM. We bring that. And I do find it a little bit confusing when Apple talks about, in their Apple Business Manager user guide, all sorts of information here. when they talk about what is Apple Business Manager, they do say, it's a simple web-based portal. It's a way for you to deploy Apple devices. And that's sort of true, but they're leaving out the part that you cannot deploy Apple devices with Apple Business Manager alone. You have to have MDM to go with it. As they say here, you can automatically enroll devices in your mobile device management MDM solution without having to physically touch or prepare the devices before users get them. That's zero touch. Ross, am I misrepresenting something here? This is always I think throws people off. They think if they get Apple Business Manager, they can start managing their devices. That's only half the story, right?
Yeah. Apple Business Manager is indispensable, and it's a necessary part of the ecosystem, both for initial deployment and then for future management, especially when we start dealing with apps and books distribution, which I'm sure we'll hit in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But it is one piece of the puzzle, and in one way that's nice that Apple hasn't totally cornered the market on MDM solutions by baking one into Apple Business Manager. But it's also only one piece of the larger setup that you need to really take advantage of it.
Yeah. And I had logged in to make sure I could get into our account so I could show you that. And Apple is very strict about kicking me out of there if I'm idle. So I've already been too idle, kick me out. I'm going to log in again. But what was it I was going to mention? Apple Business Manager. Well, I'll think of it in a minute. So I'm going to log in with an Apple Business Manager account that we don't use anymore, but it still has lots of good data in it. So it'll give us an example of how this really works. So I'm logging in, and here we are. We get dumped into the accounts area. Ross, do you want me to walk through this, or do you want to walk through this? What do you...
Sure. If we can roll through here, I'll let you know right off the bat that in this left sidebar, only a handful of items are going to be super useful in your day-to-day. This activity, it's a great log of changes. If you have multiple people on your team who are in here touching things, it can sometimes be nice to know when something moves or is added or deleted. But the first thing that's really important is the second tab that's called Locations. And this is for setting up physical locations that you interact with, because you can then set up some further deployment options based on location for some of the other types of settings. And so if you're a small organization, almost all of your devices are going to be treated pretty much the same. Stick with one location. If you've got multiple retail stores or multiple offices in different cities or different states, you're going to want to configure separate locations for each of those for sort of the steps to come. You'll notice
we can help with that. Once you have this is what I wanted to mention, Ross, is once you have an Apple Business Manager account, we then want to be invited in as an administrator into that account. And you would do that in the account area by adding a new account. And we will provide you instructions on exactly what to fill out here, because it is important to fill it out the way we ask it to be filled out, because there are options that I would avoid and that can be confusing. But once this is filled out, the biggest thing people miss is in our instructions, once you create an account, you then have to send an invite to that person, right, Ross? And there are a couple different ways to do that. And we will walk you through that, but that's the other step people miss, is they create the account, but they don't send us the actual invite. So it's a two-step process. It's all these little things that make this super annoying to set up, Ross.
Yeah. But the good news is once we have access, we tend to be in pretty good shape.
Yes. Yes.
Another nice thing about this is that when Ben was first going through how he wanted to get the account spun up to begin with, and his recommendation of using an email alias or distribution list or something else, a shared mailbox, where and a ping can go from Apple when you're trying to authenticate, and it forwards wherever it needs to go. The nice thing about having that just being associated with a distribution list or alias is it's not necessarily tied to a single employee's contact information, right? And so if you have someone else at the organization, if the person who was, sort of running this to begin with, who was helping us get it set up, they leave the company. You don't need to do any juggling or management of that email address, right? We just change who it forwards to.
Right.
Off and on our way we go.
Yeah, that's why we have 4 administrators here. Apple will warn you repeatedly that you should have at least 2, because if you only have 1 administrator and something happens to that login, where that person's not available when you need it, you're not going to get in without a lot of verification through Apple. To circle back on that, this is the thing I really wanted to mention is this is super frustrating to me, how difficult it is to get set up. But I have to remind myself, from a security standpoint, it's secure. If it was easy to set up, it would probably not be as secure. And you can imagine when we're talking about zero touch management of a device, you would not want that to be taken trivially or to happen so easily that someone could steal the management of your devices. So it is super important from Apple's perspective that they know where you're buying and that you've authorized that purchase to be associated with Apple Business Manager, and you've authorized Apple Business Manager to be associated with an MDM, a mobile device management system. Because if it was super easy, you could imagine what the bad actors would do to that situation. Okay, that's my soapbox, Ross. Let's keep going.
Yeah, it's an important soapbox. But yeah, so we talked briefly about accounts, right? So you have your locations for your business. You now have individual accounts that are logging in. Many of these will be administrators either of all of Apple Business Manager's features, or you can actually get really specific here and allow users to manage certain types of things. So you can have someone that just manages user accounts. You can have someone that manages locations, apps and books, or MDM enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
And this is generally stuff that we're going to take care of for you. The reason that you will also see some other kinds of accounts there, I don't think we're going to get too into it today. But one of the things you can do in Apple Business Manager is deal with what are called managed Apple IDs. Mm-hmm. And these are Apple IDs that are all under the umbrella of your organization. Instead of having your employees create their own @yourbusinessname.com Apple IDs with their own personal information tied to their payment methods. Inside of Apple Business Manager, you can take control of your domain, which is a whole other process, and then spin up these other accounts that you can centrally manage and use, and they have their own unique feature set. And so in some organizations, we may have dozens in here for all the individual employees. And for others, we'll just have a couple administrators and get on with it.
Yeah, managed Apple IDs is certainly a topic that we could focus on for another live stream. And the debate is still out on this. I still feel it's early days. There are some very specific use cases where Apple IDs are super beneficial. And there are others where they can just complicate the situation. So managed business or managed Apple IDs, which started in School Manager. And by the way, we're in Business Manager, but there is a School Manager for anyone who is associated with a school that's very similar. And Apple Business Manager grew out of the School Manager. They're very similar. But yeah, eventually we'll get to leveraging managed Apple IDs. And that brings me to another point, Ross, which is the reason you want to get in to this system now is Apple is layering features onto this as we go. They introduced managed Apple IDs much later than Apple Business Manager. And I believe with the new MDM that they talked about, Ross, coming out with, I think, iOS 15 and Monterey Mac OS, what was the term? What is the term? Let me check my notes.
Was that a declarative?
Declarative MDM, yes.
Yeah.
So I would imagine with their new iteration of MDM, we may see even more features tied to Apple Business Manager. But today, the real reason we need it is we need it for zero touch, and we need it for apps and books. So maybe what we could do, Ross, we'll skip through the accounts for now. We talked enough about that. There are different roles you can assign people. When it comes to devices, there are ways to assign devices to different MDMs. Some people use one MDM, some people have different MDMs, maybe one MDM for their Macs and maybe another one for their iOS devices. I guess that's in the settings though, isn't it, Ross?
Correct. Yeah, this is just going to be your master list of every device that's associated to, that was purchased in such way that is associated to your Apple Business Manager. You'll see that the majority of these are set to unassigned, but notice the top one says Adigy MDM Server 2020. Great. And so when you've got these new devices, these new purchases from Apple or other authorized resellers, you can tell Apple Business Manager where it should go. And that's going to be down in settings, where we'll then head to device management settings. This is where I spend a whole lot of my time. So default device assignment. You can change each individual product type, where it's going to land when it arrives. The great thing about this is that, let's say we've got, you know, your computer's set up in Adigy, you want to start adding your iOS devices as well. Well, we're going to want to treat those a little bit different, right? So all of the policies that apply to your Macs may not apply to your iPads and vice versa. And so we can actually build separate MDM server tokens to make sure that if you enroll an iPad, it goes into a very specific place in Adigy. Your Macs go to a different, very specific place. Your phones, your Apple TVs, it allows this great granular control over that enrollment experience as far as Zero Touch is concerned.
So in this setup, we've told everything to go to our Adigy MDM, but we could switch the iPhones to automatically go to this Mosel MDM, or we could say none, I don't want to do anything. And that is where I've also seen some people get tripped up with ABM, and they try to use Zero Touch. They miss this step. So the device is technically here, but it's not assigned anywhere. And it won't get assigned anywhere unless you manually assign it or you tell it where you want it to go. These are long gone devices, and I'm not going to make any edits here, but there is a way to auto enroll, as we just looked at, and then you can also manually enroll. And you can also, if when the box arrives, if you want to, if you're new to Zero Touch and you're new to this, if you order from Apple, you will get a serial number either on the box. I think they might. I don't know if they give you the serial number in a confirmation email before the box arrives, but I know for sure the serial number is on the shipping box if you look for it. And if you were to type that serial number, let's say it was this one, QP, QP117. Actually, I got two of them, but if you have a box that you think should be an Apple Business Manager and you look it up and it's not here, then Zero Touch is not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work and the reason it's not here is because something happened with your purchase that never assigned it to Apple Business Manager. And I've seen this most often with resellers, but it can also happen with Apple. If you buy directly from Apple and you didn't tell Apple Business Manager about your accounts, your Apple accounts, then they're not going to know which Apple Business Manager to assign it to. So there's a relationship there that has to be set up. And you can see here in this example, we had set up an Apple customer number, so Apple knew where to assign devices. And we'd also set up Apple Retail, because at least at the time, I don't know if they've combined retail and online yet, but Apple Online and Apple Retail were separate at one point. I think they're working to get those merged. And then of course, AT&T. And a lot of these reseller numbers, if I needed to add more, I could just add them here. It could be, CDW would be another one that would have a reseller number. But just because I added CDW here doesn't mean that CDW will know to take my purchase and apply it to my Apple Business Manager until I give CDW that information and say, please do this when I purchase Apple devices. So just be prepared the first time you go through this. You might run into some of those challenges that you missed or you gave to CDW. I'm sorry to beat up on CDW, but I don't mind doing it. If you do that and they don't have their process in place yet, you may run into issues. So that the assignments are pretty straightforward. The devices are either in the system or they're not. They're either assigned or not. You can see there's also an option to release a device. Just be careful. There, you have a one-time release button. There's no coming back. So you can release, when you're done with the device, you're going to give it to somebody, you're going to sell it, you're going to recycle it. You need to release that device. And it cannot come back into your system unless something's changed, right, Ross? That's my understanding.
Yeah, no, once it's released, it is gone. And it's also worth just mentioning briefly, again, this is a subject complex enough to warrant its own separate talk. But there's only one other real way to get devices into Apple Business Manager other than via an authorized reseller, and that's something called Apple Configurator. And it's a tool that allows you to take a Mac or an iOS device that's already out in the wild, and with an administrator physically having access to that device and connecting it through Configurator, there's a way to get that into Apple Business Manager. It is a bit of a process, and it does require erasing the device. So it is not our preferred method, but in a worst case scenario, there are still some options that are just much more labor intensive, I guess I should say.
Yeah, here's one that there's an iPad we had enrolled via Configurator. We recently released it because we wanted to move it to another MDM and stop, because we're not using this Apple Business Manager anymore. So we wanted to get it out of here. So we released it. But yeah, it's a good point, Ross. And that also reminds me that if you use VisionBot, if you're a client of ours and you use VisionBot, we have a little tag in VisionBot that tells you if a device is supervised or not. And essentially, supervision means that the device is in Apple Business Manager. And that means we have full control as far as Apple is concerned over the device. It is supervised. You can still manage a device without supervision. It's just that that device is not in Apple Business Manager. So we may be missing some capabilities. And those capabilities differ from Mac OS to iPad OS, even to iOS. In fact, one of the features of Apple Business Manager that's required, or it's required to have Apple Business Manager, is shared iPads, which is also more popular in schools. So I don't know a lot of businesses that do that, but if you want to do the shared iPad concept, you have to have Apple Business Manager, and that iPad has to be in here, whether it's brought in through Configurator or through purchasing. Okay, so we talked about managed Apple IDs, or we touched on it. Touched on shared iPads. I mentioned supervision. What I really want, and enrollment. What I really want to mention is content, apps and books. And Ross, you know more about this than I do, but I think this is a super cool feature because it essentially allows you to install some software and not deal with Apple IDs, right?
Yeah, it is powerful and it is necessary. Because you may run into business critical applications that are only being deployed via the App Store. There's always been, chatter in the admin community of people saying like, all right, so given the option, do we want to install things manually, deploy them manually using package installers, things like that, or do we want to use apps and books? And sometimes that decision's made for you. If the developer isn't publishing something for you to just take off their website and deploy, you're going to need this setup in order to use their applications. And the powerful things here are that you can just immediately search for anything in the App Store, and that's going to be apps for Mac, iOS, iPadOS. You can search for books to be deployed as well, and you can procure those licenses right here, assign them to a location. Remember, we talked about locations back at the beginning of this. And this is where you can start being very granular about, what you want to land on which devices in different geographical regions, things like that. And then deploy these apps to your fleet completely Apple ID agnostic. So you don't need to worry about any privacy concerns about your employees that may have their own personal Apple ID set up or their own payment method set up. These apps are going to be licensed to the serial number of the device that they're being deployed to. And that just means that not only is it easier to make sure that everyone gets the same applications, it means that you don't need to worry so much about updates to those as well. Because historically, if you download an app with one Apple ID on a phone and then switch and log into a different one, it's still going to ask you for the password for the Apple ID that originally purchased or licensed the content in order to run updates. By getting this information through Apple Business Manager, by building this license, then deploying it through an MDM solution connected to Apple Business Manager, you can push all of those updates automatically. There's no additional authentication required. It is not owned by the user on that device. It is owned by the device. That just makes the whole process so much smoother.
Yeah, so if I went to the App Store and tried to get Adobe Lightroom, I would have to provide it with my Apple ID or an Apple ID that works, and presumably mine. And if I did that, then it would forever, at least forever that it lives on my computer, be linked to my Apple ID. So every time there was an update, it would ask for that Apple ID. And we all know people struggle with remembering their passwords, especially ones they don't use very often. So it is nice to eliminate the need for a user to enter a password or an Apple ID credentials when installing or updating software. But more importantly, as Ross mentioned, it's now no longer tied to the individual. It's no longer tied to me. If I go through Apple Business Manager and deployed Adobe Lightroom in this method, it would be controlled by the organization. And especially if this were a paid application. And I don't know if we have any examples of paid applications. It's a little strange. You buy the license, even if it's free, but you buy it, allocate it, and assign it. But we could take that assignment, away from my computer and say, give it to Ross. Or, if someone left the organization, you get the license back. And this was a huge problem in the beginning when even when apps cost a couple dollars, people were frustrated that they would buy them for their team members. And then the team member would walk out the door and you'd have to buy it again and again and again. So now, whether the app is free or the app is $50 or anything in between, the organization owns the app. Nobody needs to enter an Apple ID. It's all managed here. I think I just said exactly what you said, Ross. So.
It's good information.
Yeah. Anything else we want to? Is there an example? Can you think of an app that would cost money? I haven't even looked at this in a while.
No, we don't really push a lot of paid licenses. You can always pull up the Affinity Suite, AFFINITY. They're a great software developer that works in the same space that Adobe does.
Yeah.
And so they've got their own versions of Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign that they publish. And it's a great solution for designers who are looking for a one-time purchase rather than a recurring subscription.
Yeah, so this is a great example because rather than spend $55 and give it to somebody, I could spend that money. The organization owns it and retains ownership. And I noticed it can be managed or redemption code. Have you ever used redemption code?
Not in a long time. Those are generally provided by developers to individuals or to organizations. You can purchase the licenses through them directly financially, and then they'll provide you with the codes. You drop the code in there, and then it'll let you you secure the license without an additional financial transaction.
Okay, great. Well, let's see. I've gone over my goal of half-hour live streams, but that's a great overview of Apple Business Manager. Unless Ross, you want me to mention anything else? And actually, as I'm in here, I could mention or would like to mention there are ways to federate Apple Business Manager to your domain. Be careful. There are pros and cons to that. We did do it with this one. We federated to Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is super cool, but there's a transition phase to get those existing accounts. Well, there really is no migration process. It's pretty much you can migrate the Apple ID, you cannot migrate the content, and that's the struggle. So if you're a brand new business setting up Apple Business Manager for the very first time and nobody has Apple IDs, maybe we look at federated authentication. But if you're an established company, and you have Apple IDs out there, it can get rather complex. So once again, talk to us. We can help you through that. The main goal is let's get everyone on these accounts, and slowly let's start using as many of the features as makes sense for your business. So I want to end just with a few K-Base articles from our website, which once again is support.forgetcomputers.com, because even though we updated the branding, it's going to be a while before we can update the domain in this situation. I'm not going to go into the details of why that is, but it is what it is. So I wanted to point out in the list here a couple things. One, going on vacation, learn how to write an effective out of office message. I thought this was a great article to check out. Under resilience, AirTag basics. I do have an AirTag now. I've been sort of playing around with it. And, the big thing in the news is, oh, you're going to stalk people with AirTags. Even though there have been tiles and other things out there, Apple has a pretty unique system in the way AirTags work and the way it works with iPhones. So I think as people learn more, they'll become less paranoid about this, but definitely read through this. And the last one I wanted to point to was don't cook your digital devices in the summer heat. If anyone's experienced this, my Apple Watch actually got thrown into a warming oven once with a pile of something, and it got really hot. I took it out and it was too hot to use, and it warned me about that, and eventually cooled down. And I've seen a phone do that in a car. I know it's very common. My brother lives in Arizona, and phones overheating in cars in Arizona is much more common than it is here in Chicago. But I've also had phones in the north woods of Minnesota in the middle of winter turn off because it's too cold. So these are just like us. These devices can only live in certain ranges of temperatures before they start to fail. So be aware of that. And this is a great article. And then the last thing I just have to share, because I think it's so cool, is if you go to youtube.com/Apple, you'll get to Apple has their own YouTube page, and there are lots of great videos here. And I stumbled upon this one, Charlie Brown, draw yourself as a Peanuts character in Pages of all applications. It does require an Apple Pencil. Well, I guess you could use your finger, but it's a great little video of how to draw yourself as a Charlie Brown character. And then there's this PDF reference, how to draw yourself. So I just thought that was fun. I wanted to share that. And remember to take advantage of our support channel as well as Apple's support channel and our support team if you have any questions. So with that, unless I missed any questions, I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll see everyone in 2 weeks, where our special guest will be Extensis. We're going to have someone from Extensis talking primarily about Universal Type Server and Universal Type Client and our new offering that we built in the cloud in cooperation with Extensis. And then we'll probably touch on some of their other products. They have a digital asset management product, both heavyweight portfolio and more of a lightweight web application, which is relatively new to me. Ross, anything else you want to add?
I think that covers all the basics. Bottom line, Apple Business Manager lets you do a lot of really, really important things today. And as Ben mentioned, it's likely going to just become more and more leveraged in the future. And so it's in everyone's best interest. Your users will appreciate having the functionality in that system. And us as administrators, it's going to allow us to take better care of your devices and offer you a better experience.
Yeah, although it's not absolutely required today, it sort of is. Like, if you really want to do everything you need to do, you got to have an Apple Business Manager account. And who knows, eventually maybe it will be required for all things managing Apple devices. Apple just hasn't taken it that far yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have trouble signing up, let us know. And once you are signed up, if you do work with us, ask us how to let us in so we can get that connected to the MDM that we use. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining me, Ross, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Of course. Take care.